feel it that way. Okay, here we go. מצוין. בואו נתחיל. שבוע טוב to everyone. A beautiful morning. I mean that. Like really, איזה יופי. And speaking about
she wasn't
rain.
here on time. Yes, יתרונות. My kids were here screaming, yelling. They
מצוין.
Now it's beautiful. It's quiet.
הלוואי, נכון. Also, I just wanted to thank Esther, who sent me something beautiful about tefillah that Israel Hashem, we're going to share it together next week, if that's okay with Esther. And in the meantime, גם נכנס?
כן.
איזה יופי, תודה. So we're going to, okay. Okay. I am terribly sorry for the delay, so we're going to get started right now with Yaakov Avinu. And Baruch Hashem that we're still in the Yaakov Avinu stories, because what we're going to do is actually turn back to where we left off, after Yitzchak Sicha Basadeh, which we said is really an elaboration of what we saw in the Brayta Gemara in Amnatach Brachot HaShachav, if you remember, where Rabbi Yosef or Rabbi Chanina says, Tefillah Keneged Avot Tikanun. And even if we reach the conclusion that ultimately, from a technical perspective, the tefillot are actually going to be established in terms of the details based on korbanot. The whole idea, even of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, is that korbanot were also accompanied with tefillot. And what Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Chanina wants to teach us, if you recall, is that there still is a spontaneous expression of emotion that must be evident in our tefillah. And therefore he says, okay, the basis is really the avot, but korbanot. And therefore, before we are going to explore, and we will, in depth, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's opinion, they said, let's really try to understand the basis of Rabbi Yosef or Rabbi Chanina. What is he trying to teach us from the avot? And we saw that by each one of the avot, there's a particular notion of tefillah that is going to be expressed. Whether if it's, you remember, by Avraham Avinu, that idea of universal judgment, right? The idea of recalibrating our own values, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu divulging the whole issue of stone to Avraham Avinu in order for him to understand the nuances of Tzedek Mishpat. Right? In other words, tefillah is really a self-reflective process
of our own value judgments. That was with regard to stone. And we saw that, therefore, we don't necessarily find tefillot, both with regard to Avram for his own children. We saw this no tefillah by Akidat Yitzchak. So even though there are Parshanim who definitely will incorporate some notion of tefillah in those stories, the basis of the Brayta is not necessarily Avraham Avinu's appellations to God for the sake of mercy, and as much as, again, the values of justice. By Yitzchak, we saw another notion of tefillah, and that is that idea of conversation, right, of a sicha. And we saw that it wasn't just a sicha with God, but the Parshanim understand that it's some type of involvement in nature, some type of perhaps even conversation with his friends. In other words, mincha is really more of stop what you're doing to reflect upon godliness, right, upon nature. Now what we're going to take a look at is perhaps the most complex, not only of the notions of tefillah, but all the more so, again, complex with regard to understanding. And Yaakov Avinu, one of the complex characters, I would argue the one who undergoes the most challenges out of all of the avot, right? And therefore, starting from Parshat Vayetze, we see more than anyone else, it's Yaakov who's afraid, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to say, Al Tira Yaakov, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, 4 times over. It's only Yaakov to whom we hear, Al Tira Abdi Yaakov, right? Which we recite Motzei Shabbat in our Malava Malka song. So we're going to be exploring together. Everyone has the Mara Makomot with them. Can I also share the screen? Is it also? No, the host disabled it. Okay.
No.
Ken, say there. Okay, so we're going to take a look. If you all have the sources, let's start right away with the first pasuk that we know from Parshat Vayetze. Vayetze Yaakov meBe'er Sheba vayelech Harana vayifga b'makom vayelech Shem ki v'hashemesh. Now I'm going to ask you if it's okay to take a look at the footnotes as well. Right, meaning I want you really, if it's okay, to pay attention to the makorot on top, but we're going to be discussing the footnotes. Now, what's interesting is that you see from footnote number 1, this is not the first time that we found this verb of pigia by Avraham Avinu, by Marata Machpelah, when he's engaged with Ephron. It says, Shma'uni ufiguli, like basically, allow me to encounter Ephron ben Sochar.
right? So what is this? A pigia, so and so. That we're going to see that Parsha Vayetze begins with the lashon of pigia, vayifga b'makom, and finally upon Yaakov's return to Eretz Yisrael, Yaakov halach ledarko vayifga'u vo malachei Elokim. So we find the exact same terminology, which is a beautiful inclusio format. As a matter of fact, the entire Parsha Vayetze is one long parsha. No parsha breaks whatsoever, nor Parshiyot Ptuchot, nor Parshiyot Stumot, which tells us you should look at this as one inclusive story, right? The story begins with Yaakov running away from Esav in the direction of Lavan. It begins with a dream, it begins with angels, and it then goes on to talk about Yaakov's work, followed by his birth story, followed by more work, followed by Yaakov running away from Lavan back to Esav, followed by another dream, followed by Yaakov returning to Eretz Yisrael and meeting angels again. Come on, that's so cool. This is like super kayasm. And what's beautiful is that the word pigia, the word bayifka, as you see then, Gana tells us clearly, it's the מהגוגל זה
איפה קיבלת את הדף?
בוואטסאפ.
וזה פתוח בוואטסאפ שלך?
איזה יופי, וואו. אוקיי, לא זה בסדר. אני אומרת אותו דבר, everyone sees everything, נכון, זה דבר טוב.
אני לא מוצאת.
זה בסדר, זה בסדר.
כי יש פה כמה חורים פתוחים של אנשים שם.
נעשה שוב. לא, זה בסדר, בסדר, כי לכולם יש את המקורות, אז באמת זה בסדר. איזה יופי. מי עובדת על קורבנות עכשיו? Okay, okay, so now what we're going to see is, take a look then at the first footnote, which tells us there are numerous bikiyot betnech. Again, and as we know, in order to figure out what this word means, we have to go back and see what these different bikiyot are. Basically, a bikiya means that you encounter, right? You meet someone. And definitely by Yivga b'makom, again, so Yaakov met the place. But that's exactly what bothers Chazal here. That's a very, very strange terminology. So take a look at Rashi. Vayifga kmo upaga b'yericho, or upaga b'dabshati, right? And here, all these different psukim, they're talking about the different borders of Eretz Yisrael. And then, so he says, one idea of a pigia is literally, again, to encounter in a place. He says, look, that's not strange. We find it in Sefer Yoshua, encountering places, right, with regard to the borders. But he says, Rabotenu Pershu, Lashon Tefila. It says, but we also find another idea of a bigia that we're going to see right now. If it means encounter, you can encounter a makom, right? And as we know, that's one of the milim manchot in the first few psukim of Parshat Vayetze, makom, and we're going to learn from here actually the importance of qualifying a makom of tefillah. And what's interesting is that the word makom appears without ever hearing what the name of the makom is, right? As a matter of fact, do you remember the scene at the beginning of Parshat Vayetze? When does he actually? When is the first time that we hear the name of the makom? Excellent. Which is when? Meaning not at the beginning, only right before he leaves, right? And he says, right? So the Torah knows at the beginning that he's going to call it Beit El, and then it says, in other words, it had a name before Yaakov got there, right? As a matter of fact, it had a name from the time of Abraham Avinu, right? I thought it's called Beit El already. And Yaakov basically recognizes the significance of the name. So tell us the place of Beit El, right? Just tell us he got to Beit El, right? And yet the Torah basically almost clouds or covers up the name of the place, and instead just calls it makom. And the reason for doing this is not only to leave it this amorphous place, but to help us recognize that for Yaakov, it's a makom that ultimately is going to be defined by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? And therefore, in his mind, it's not Beit El, right? It's a makom. And that's why one of the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in fact makom, teaching us that we subjectively define a place as a place.
Why is that significant? Because even though we find Vayifka in this place and that place, what Chazal are very sensitive to is Vayifka b'makom. It seems that what is Yaakov encountering? The makom.
But he has to find a personal relationship.
Thank you. Kol hakavod, kol hakavod. And therefore, why do we call HaKadosh Baruch Hu makom? I thought Hashem cannot, right? The transcendence of God can't be contained into a place. So Sarah is saying beautifully that Yaakov, basically, we see from Vayifga b'makom, he is trying to encounter his own place with God, right? Everyone see that? And therefore, Chazal say, when you see the word Vayifga b'makom, it can't just mean that he's encountering a physical place. He's encountering a subjective meeting. That what do you know? Turn to Yirmiyahu, and there in Yirmiyahu, Perek Zayin, the Al Tifga Bi. There, it actually does use the term, do not encounter me. Hashem is telling Yirmiyahu, you're not allowed to daven for these people, right? Al Tifga Bi, right? The people are so terrible, you know, unlike Moshe. Don't think that you're Moshe or Shmuel, by the way, Yirmiyahu, the same Perek. So from the context, Chazal extrapolate that the word pigia is also, in fact, encountering Hashem in tefillah, and therefore Chazal tell us, wait a second, what time is this? That Yaakov vayifga b'makom vayalan sham kiva hashemesh. The sun has already set. In other words, it's nighttime. And this is the basis for Chazal to say, Yaakov tekein tfilat arvit, b'shina hakatuv v'lo katav vayitpalel. So what the Midrash says, rightly so why not just incorporate the term vayitpalel Yaakov? In order to teach us something else, namely that there is an encounter, not just with God, but there is an encounter with the land. What does that mean? He encountered the land. In other words, the land came to him, i.e. kavtza alav haaretz, that the earth basically condensed. And this is very significant because Rashi will say that what does it mean that the earth condensed? Not only that Yaakov got there quickly, but also when Yaakov says, Ein zakim beit elokim v'zeh shar hashamayim, who remembers what Rashi says? Wait a second, where's Shar Hashamayim? Where's Beit Elokim going to be? Not Beit El, but Yerushalayim. What happens? Hakol, everything basically condensed into one place. Beautiful. And Hinzi's been so patient.
No, I know my Hebrew's not great, but I know that you're saying that it means like the encounter, but doesn't pagam means like to injure or like pigua?
Beautiful. Hinzi, beautiful.
Maybe because I came during the time of the Intifada.
No, you're 100% right. And Bella's asking the same question because paga isn't just encounter, but encountering in. So how do you know what we're about to say? Encountering in, meaning when hu pagabi, right? He hurt me. What does that mean? How did he hurt me? Not my feelings. He clashed. He encountered me in a belligerent manner, right? He encountered me in a hard way. Beautiful.
It's because it's not like he was maleh todah and he thanks God.
Exactly.
And he decides to litpaleh.
Excellent.
Only when he's in like a big tzara, then he does. But why does it have to come like that? Again,
Beautiful. Excellent. So Bella's asking like
when
Hinzi.
he wanted a baby, then he called out to God. When they wanted something back, why didn't they call out to God to say thank you?
Beautiful, beautiful. So that's exactly it. Why incorporate? Do you mind if I say it this way? Why employ such a harsh terminology, right? But Yaakov literally encountered the place in a difficult way. Why it have to be a difficult way? Bella's saying, why can't he just turn to Hashem in a positive way? So can we just remember Yaakov's state of mind right now?
No, but now he's running away.
Yaakov is running away from his brother who wants to murder him. Right? Yaakov's unsure whether he's ever going to see his parents again, whether he's ever going to come back here, even though his father had just told him, may you receive the bracha of Avraham Avinu. Does he know if he's going to get that bracha? No, his father said, that's like saying, I wish that, you get this scholarship. Right? I don't know if you're going to get it, but I wish that you do. And here, Yaakov is coming with all of his uncertainties. Take a look at footnote number 3. And this is going to answer Hinzi's and Bella's questions, right? Rashi basically, again, is he bringing the pshat and then the drash when he says Rabbeinu Dirshu? So as we know, Rashi really at times believes that the drash is the pshat. In other words, the term vayifga itself has two meanings, as you both said, right? Vayifga means to encounter, right? Like we see, and you can encounter a place, like we see in Sefer Yoshua.
On the other hand, again, it also is a very difficult terminology, right? Of a pagam being a belligerent place. And therefore, again, that's why you also see in Bereshit Rabbah, Vayifga b'makom, bikesh la'avor v'naseh olam kotel b'fanav. That actually he didn't want to stop in Beit El. What happened? Vayifga b'makom, he hit a wall, right? Basically, Hakadosh Baruch Hu like put up some type of barrier, and he bumped into it. And what here we see is that, yes, there is a belligerent state. He is hurting, right? What does that mean? The reason Yaakov can't just come to the place in a nice way is because there's so much going on in him inside right now. Yaakov isn't in a nice place, right? He's not coming to Hashem at a rachamim because he really is hurt. And therefore we have this term of vayifga. Let's take a look at the next source. And we're going to
Sonny, the idea of Yaakov, when we talk about this whole RV thing, we're talking about a time when it's very uncertain, which is the night. It's very different from that gets up in the morning or even Yitzchak in the afternoon. This is night when you don't see anything and you don't really know where you're going. And when you're in that kind of a state of mind like Yaakov was, that's exactly what he needed.
100%. Becky, beautiful, right? Which helps us understand this difficult terminology of Pigiyah. Let's take a look at Masechet Sanhedrin, where we're going to see the basis of Rashi right now. And then Vayifga b'makom, Vayalan shama ki ba hashamesh ki mata l'charan amar efshar avarti amakom shetpalalu bo avotai vani lo hitpalalti bo ba'i lemehedar. That the pasuk says that Yaakov really intended on going straight to Haran. And then the next pasuk says, and we know that the place is Beit El. So the Midrash says that actually Yaakov was really like halfway there on his way to Haran. And then he said to himself, wait a second, right? I basically have left Eretz Yisrael. Could it be that I passed by the place where my father, meaning referring to Avraham Avinu, where my father had went and davened, and I didn't daven there? So he went backwards, right? Vayifga b'makom. That all of a sudden he was afraid. Kafza le'arei, the land condensed for him. Miyad vayifga b'makom, and that's why he encountered the place, right? Almost by default. Davar acher ein pigiyah ela tefila. And the Gemara is saying, okay, here we have another explanation, but really both explanations are similar in the sense that vayifga b'makom, he encountered the place encountered him, meaning he had to get here. Basically, these two explanations, look at them for vayifga b'makom. One is shekaftzal haaretz, which means that pigiyah means he got there all of a sudden, right? He encountered by surprise. Right, that's one explanation. The other, the Davar Acher, says that it's tefillah. But the truth is that even the first explanation is telling you that it's tefillah. Because why did he encounter the place? Because he realized that he went past a place that was meant to be makom tefillah. Right? Everyone see how these ideas are really connected one to the other. He said, makom shitpalu bi avotai v'ani lo hitpalalti bo. And so Abram and Yitzchak already had a pigiyah b'makom. Yaakov realizes that he has to continue, and therefore he says, okay, I also need a pigiyah b'oto makom, not just to encounter the place.
Why did it let him to pass by?
Very nice. Why on the first? Because he had to realize it himself. Meaning it's not a makom, which tells you what? So as Sarah's highlighting what a pigiyah is, it's not only that the place should be a place conducive for tefillah, you have to be the one to encounter it. You have to recognize it, right? Even if that place ultimately is going to come to you, but you have to be cognizant thereof, right? You have to be sensitive to this as well. So now we're going to see further statements of Chazal that only corroborate, and now we're going to see elaborate upon this as well. Take a look at Bereshit Rabbah, the next source. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. As you remember, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he's the one to say that tefillah is connected karbanot, right? Not connected avot. But take a look at what he says. Avot harishonim hitzkinu shalosh tefillot. Even he agrees that Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov established some aspects of tefillah, not that our tefillot are based on it, because he believes that it's not necessarily just an expression of emotion, but also karbanot, right? We discussed this before. Abraham taking tefillah shacharit, shenamar beishkim Abraham b'boker lo makom asher matsham ve'ein amida el tefillah, like we learned from Pinchas v'yamol Pinchas v'yipalel, some judgment. Yitzchak taking tefillah mincha, shenamar v'yitza Yitzchak lasuach b'sadeh, ein sicha el tefillah, shenamar eshpoch lefanav sichi, and we discussed all the psukim in Tehillim that have siach, that have a conversation, and we saw that this is going to be the one that talks most about sicha with God. Yaakov taking tefillah David shenamar b'yitka b'makom ve'im p'gia el tefillah, that we learned from Yirmiyahu. V'chein hu omer ve'im neviim hem ve'im yesh dvar Hashem yitam yifguuna b'Hashem tzvaot. This is so interesting that this midrash brings one pasuk for Abraham, one pasuk for Yitzchak, and two psukim for Yaakov. Everyone see this? Even though Rashi only quoted the first pasuk of vayifga b'makom based on al titpalel b'ad hamazeh ve'al tisah b'adam rina b'tefillah ve'al tifga bi from Yirmiyahu Perek Zayin. And here this midrash brings another source, right? The source of Yirmiyahu Chaf Zayin, ve'im neviim hem ve'im yesh dvar Hashem yitam yifguuna b'Hashem tzvaot. So these two psukim both corroborate that Pegiah is tefillah, right? The second pasuk is if they're neviim and if in dvar Hashem yitam, if God speaks to them, yifguuna b'Hashem, they should encounter God, right? How do you encounter God? But they're both from Yirmiyahu, so it definitely makes sense. The question is, why bring two psukim, right? One pasuk should be enough. So take a look. Again, the first one is difficult because what is the first pasuk? Why do you think Chazal in the earlier source, in the Midrash, bring two psukim of Pegiah from Yom Halakavot? So Bella already answered. One is positive, one is negative. The one from Perek Zayin was very negative. Al tifgabi, right? Do not daven to me, right? And this terminology, again, al tifgabi, as opposed to, let's say, vayamot Pinchas vayipalel, again, there we saw plilut, right? There's a judgment. This is like much harsher. Al tifgabi, do not encounter me. Versus, as Bella said, the second pasuk is actually a positive pasuk. If they're neviim, then what's the neviim?
Does that have anything?
They should talk to God.
Does that have anything to do with the idea that Arvit is Reshut or was Reshut?
Ah, interesting.
Because Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, I can understand because there is no korban for Arvit. So he would definitely think that it was, but if you're talking about the Avot.
Rabbi Yosef bar Rabbi Chanina, he should say that
right.
Arvit is really chovah,
right.
Other than the fact that the Midrash tells us that there are times Pegiah that you do have a Pegiah and times that you don't have a Pegiah.
So that could be the reason for the two psukim, one negative and one positive, one reshut and one chovah.
Yafe, beautiful, beautiful. We didn't argue that it's not necessarily one positive, one negative. One is harsh and the other is soft, right? Meaning more that type of distinction. And both of them are talking about particularly Nevi'im, right? It's the job of Nevi'im to daven. So what's interesting is that when we see a vayifga b'makom, again, there definitely is this idea of in this case, right, not just Pegiah, but nivu'ah, right, that he's about to receive nivu'ah, which we know is exactly what happens through the chalom. So it's not just telling us that he's encountering God. He is experiencing much more than that, right? It's not him just coming to Hashem. Hashem is also going to come to him, which is a beautiful idea. So now that we've seen the basic terminology of vayifga, we're going to see other psukim that are going to tell us something about this very, I'm going to say, harsh term still, vayifga, right? To encounter, and just like Kinsey and Bella said, it's going to be also like a hurtful term. And where else do you see this? Turn to the next page. Al kapayim kisaor vayitzav aleha b'mafgia, right, from Sefer Eov. And Rashi says, what does this mean? Al kapayim, al ha'ananim, right, that on the clouds, just like in Sefer Eicha, we have nisa kapayim, nisa levavenu el kapayim, el avinu shabashamayim, right, we're lifting up our palms heavenward. So al kapayim all the way up to the sky, kisa or, right? And vayitzav aleha b'mafgia, right? And then all of a sudden, right, then God comes b'mafgia, with an encounter. But Chazal understand that what is it talking about? That kapayim isn't just my hands reaching heavenward, but rather, again, that al kapayim kisa, on my hands that perform iniquities. God covers my sins, and then vayitzav aleha b'mafgia, and that God comes again to basically to command, Chazal say, to stop the rain from coming, b'mafgia, so that people will come, b'pgia, which we already know what's pgia. God stops it, meaning, in other words, God will cover up our punishments and withhold rain, waiting for what? Mafgia, waiting for our pgia, dahainu, tefila. Biduk. That's how Chazal understand this, that vayitzav aleha, Hashem is waiting for pgia, mafgia b'tefila. God is going to wait until someone comes, a Navi, the Gadol Hador, and say, Kadosh Baruch Hu, I know we've sinned, but Am Yisrael really, really need you right now. So here we see another vayitzav aleha b'mafgia, again, pgia being tefila. Let's take a look and see why Chazal understand this pasuk in Eov that way, based on Masechet Tanit, which is very exciting because this is Daf Yomi these days. Amar Rabami, ein hagshamim netzarim ela ba'avon gazel, and the rains don't stop, rather just ba'avon gazel, because of the sin of stealing. Shneimar al kapayim kisaor vayitzav aleha b'mafkia. Right, that's the midrash on the pasuk. Again, ba'avon kapayim kisaor ve'in kapayim ela chamas. What does it mean that God covers up our hands? Because our hands are the ones that perform the stealing, like we find in Yonah, min hachamas asher b'chapehim ve'in or ela matar. And then God withholds the rain from the skies. What's the rain from the skies? What's the light from the skies? Sorry, the rain. Sorry about that. I gave it all away. And what's going to fix that? Right? A beautiful, beautiful terminology. So what do we already see from Pgia? So Sarah said this without realizing, meaning she was talking about the pasuk, that what is Pgia? Who has to encounter whom?
We have to encounter God.
And we have to be sensitive to the fact that we're coming, right? We're coming to God, yes, in a belligerent manner, entreating upon God, right? So really, vayifga, now we see, means not just to encounter, but just like Hindi said, this is harsh, right? You're hurting God. The whole point is like pushing God, right? Everyone see this? We're entreating upon HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why the word Pgia teaches us a different type of tefillah. It's not nice, like sicha. It's not even, judgment, like a amida and tefillah. Rather, it's a pgia, right? It really is. We're hurting God. We're coming adrisha, right? We're demanding from God, entreating upon God, right? Entreating is a very harsh terminology. There's no. Right. No one had a real bakasha, right? Even Abraham, it was about reflecting upon. It's more of a reflection, right? There's no nice bakasha, like, please Hashem, can you do this? Even though Abraham uses the term, this is the nicest, right? Sicha isn't nice. Sicha is just,
I don't know, because when
neutral, right? It's not exactly, but yeah, that was definitely. Right, but he said the Chazal don't learn it even from Atzira. Atzira would have been also thinking that that's not what Chazal learned from Yitzchak, exactly. But Pgia definitely harsh by Yaakov, and we're not surprised to find it by Yaakov.
No, why?
Ein afa dugma lebakasha yafa. In other words, tefillah is not. It's not just so nice.
The person is
Kiva. You're the one helping me. Ken?
אני אומרת שהטבע של האדם זה לא לפנות כשנוח לו כנראה, רק כשקשה לו, כשאין לו, כשבצרה, אז פתאום נזכר מתפלל.
יפה, יפה, beautiful.
אבל כל כך נדרש מאיתנו תפילה.
נכון. Right, so Bella's pointing out that it's not, I mean, miteva ha'adam, we should just want to turn to Hashem. So that's exactly it. That's what we're going to discuss more, that it seems to be the teva of Adam to do that. And therefore, this tefillah of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov is teaching us something beyond the norm, right? Which we said is also highlighting particular spontaneous expressions of emotions and not the, oh, right, we feel every day, oh, Hashem, I want this, Hashem, I want that, you know, help me with this, help me with that. These are particular expressions, right, which are much more spontaneous, right? You don't feel pigia all the time. You don't even feel sicha all the time. You don't even feel amidah all the time, but you do feel a general bakasha. So perhaps that's what Chazal are teaching us as well. So now
That's what Ruth said to Naomi. That's what Ruth said to Naomi.
Exactly.
Right?
Pushing, don't push, don't
push me away.
Meaning enough, right? B'diuk. So pigia is definitely a very harsh terminology. And I think Hindi wants to ask something. Yes.
One other thing though, also when it comes to Yaakov, but then in this week's Parsha by Yishlach, there's another encounter also, like when he's in distress before he comes to Esav. And you would think that also here that maybe instead of it saying Vayomer, they would also use like Vayifga, and then but they
exactly.
don't.
Isn't that interesting? That before encountering Esav, Hinzi's making a very good point. It should say Vayifga again, right?
It's not.
And instead,
It's not to God. But it's not to God.
He has a tefillah. He says, "Katolti mikol hachasadim mikol hamet asher asita betnech." He is talking to God. Okay. So maybe yeah. Okay, so Bella's saying that when he's leaving, that pigia is more a broader pigia, even though he's really concerned with himself, right? Meaning he's running away. So that is a great question, and he's asking, right? Why not? So that's exactly it. So it seems that after that initial pigia, what does Hashem then promise him? Hashem says, don't worry, you're going to return to the land and you're going to receive the brachot. So Yaakov knows by the time he encounters Esav, he has the confidence that he has the brachot. And now he's just nervous that Esav's going to kill some of his family, right? Meaning he's not so afraid of his own survival. He's afraid, as Rashi says, that he has to kill Esav. He's afraid of his encounter with Esav. So he turns to God more, I'm going to say, mitachanunim, right? It's more pleading with God as opposed to encountering God, right? And that I think is a significant difference. So take a look at the Abu Raham, who writes one of the earliest Pirushim on the Sidur. And he writes, particularly on the Tevilah of Yom HaKippurim, he says, what do you learn from that pasuk in Eov of Tzav Yeshuatenu b'mafkia? He says, Vayitzav aleim b'mafkia, klamar tziva Yeshuatu b'tvilah sh'anu mitpalalim lefanecha. That God is basically commanding us. It's not Vayitzav aleha, that God is commanding about the rains. He says, no, God is commanding about us, that we have to come to him in a pigia. Mafgia milashon the altif gabi. And that's why he quotes then the pasuk from Yirmiyahu of altif gabi, do not encounter me, do not come. There are going to be certain times that Hashem tells the Nabi, you don't have the right, again, for pigia. But that's when Hashem says, by the way, Chazal learned, what does Yirmiyahu learn from that when Hashem says, so don't come to me in tefillah? What does Yirmiyahu understand? Dafka? Meaning Hashem is basically hinting to him, reverse psychology, that Hashem is saying, so why haven't you davened yet, right? Time to daven, which is exactly what Yirmiyahu does. Let's take a look at another pasuk where Chazal are going to understand also from Yov. Right, so look at, again, at this terminology. The Malbim actually says, what does this pasuk mean? Who is God, right, that we should worship him? And meaning people who are saying, oh my gosh, God doesn't exist, right? Eov is talking about, there are people who say maybe there isn't a God. And if there is a God, why should we turn to him in tefillah? Because there are people who are saying that God doesn't listen, right? In other words, how does it help even if if we're turning to God. So the Gemara Masachet Sanhedrin says, Tanu Rabbanan, Dor Hamabul Lo Nitka'u Ela B'Shvil Tova Sheshpi Alehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's exactly it. That Dor Hamabul, again, we're the ones saying exactly this. Oh, look, God is giving us all these things. V'hikar ma shamru, v'imru la'el sumeni v'dar tarchacha lo chapatznu, ma shadai kinavdenu, ma na'u kinavgabo. We don't need God. Why should we turn to God? Amru, klum tzrichem anu lo, ela l'tzipa shel geshamim. We don't even need God for rain, because what do we have? Yesh lanu naharot, mayanot, shanu mistafkin mihen. You don't have to turn to God heavenwards. We have plenty of water sources. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'tova sheshpati lahen ba machisin oti. And they're anchoring me with the goodness that I gave them. Ha'uba ani danotam. I'm going to judge them, particularly with water. In other words, what does Hashem want us to see? Hashem wants our pigia. He wants us to need the rain. He wants us to realize that we only have narot and mayanot because of God. And therefore, again, this whole idea of even the creation of the world. What does it say at the very beginning? B'chol siach hasadeh terem yitzmach. Why? Ki adam ayin labod et hadama. And the Chazal, Rashi quotes the Midrash there, that Adam ein lahavid et habriot lakadosh baruch hu Eliyahu kachoni hama'agel, that Hashem is waiting for man to turn to him with prayer. And that's why, again, like Eliyahu, like Choni, that Hashem waits. And then if the people aren't going to turn, then Hashem withholds the rain until there is going to be tefillah. So all of these are the terminology of Pigiyah. Look also at Yeshayahu, Bahu, Chatarabim, Nasal, Olapushim, Yafgiyah. So the Midrashim explain there as well that it's talking about, again, Moshe Rabbeinu, or the whole idea of in Mafgiyah, Hashem is waiting for people to come and encounter. Becky already quoted the pasuk from Ruth, Al tivki'i lazvech, lashuv macharayach, and Rashi learns from here as well by Gaba Makom, like a man, Adam hapogea b'chavero sheba kenegdo, right? Like Hindi said, the way that we use it in terminology today, stop bothering me, right? Stop hurting me, and that's exactly it. Al tivki'i, and we learn this from Ruth as well, right? That we're talking about encountering with not just a bakasha, but a pgi'ah, right? Meaning it's much more than a simple bakasha. We're going to end with the last three Mekorot on the third page in Kohelet Rabbah, where we also see that Kohelet is talking about the time of death, and he says, Ki et upega yikret kulam. There's a time when there's a pgi'ah, that everyone is hurt. What is he referring to? There's a time that we all die. That's right. So again, what does that mean? Iti shepogat hadam umareret bo kol hadvarim ha'ila b'hu mafgia maya aseh. So Chazal learned from here, why use that term pega to describe death? To teach us that if a person deserves death, yelech v'yasok b'tfilah u'b'tachanunim b'hu nitzal, that you should go and daven, pigiyah, you're going to get a pigiyah. What should you do? Be pogea God. Right? Go and encounter God. And that's why it says, Rav Huna sha'al Shmuel, Amar le matan dachsev ki et bapega. Amar lo, pamim sha'adam mafkia b'tfilah v'ne'aneh, pamim sha'mafkia ve'ino na'aneh. There are times that you encounter God and you're answered, and times that you're not. She'en lacha she'sider tefillah b'tachanunim yoter Moshe Rabbeinu. Because look at Moshe Rabbeinu, he davens the gematria Betchanan, again 573, mashu kazeh, tefillot, and
515.
15. Thank you, Becky. Toda rabba. 515 tefillot, v'hu lo ne'aneh, hein kerbu yamecha lamut. He was still told, and that he's going to die. So you should try. Meaning when it comes to death, that's a time to daven. And what type of davening? Really a pigiyah, right? Encounter, plead, entreat upon God. So we see that Yaakov's tefillah is a much harsher tefillah, right? And this bothers Bella. I'm looking at her face. She doesn't like this type of pigiyah. But again, there's a time for this tefillah. It definitely does arouse, and that's why in Devarim Rabbah, the famous Midrash, take a look where it says that there are 10 lishonot of tefillah: sho'ed, sa'ak, na'ak, rinak, giyah, bitzur, kriya, nipol, pilul, tachanunim. By the way, anyone notice which one is left out of here? Sicha is in here.
Sicha.
Atira, right? Both of these are in here, which is very interesting. And don't worry, there are other midrashim that do put it in here, but definitely, what's the common denominator between these? Why don't you think Sicha is here? Look at all of them.
Sicha's more gentle, and it's
Gentler.
it's also a dialogue.
But Rina is also, but Rina is extreme, meaning it is, but it's jubilance, meaning these aren't neutral terms, right?
No.
They're all, but Rina is definitely yoter chiyuvi, even though there are some persons that explain that Rina doesn't have to be joy, it could also be out of fear. It's by Yaronu, by Yiplu al Pneihem. Isn't that interesting? That it could all be, this midrash seems to understand that they're all terms of tza'akot, right? Even if it's Rina,
We have that.
more, but
We have, Sonny, we have that in Tehillim. We have that in Tehillim. Reina Berada.
Exactly, meaning not just Gilu Birada, but Rinu Birada. That's exactly it. That Rina here doesn't seem to be jubilance and joy, but rather fear. So take a look at the last source, again, where once again we have Yaakov at the end of the parsha, and it ends with this as well. Now, this makes a lot of sense because when Yaakov is first leaving Eretz Yisrael on his way to Haran, he's running for his life. And what ends up happening? Vayifga b'makom, and he sees malachim, right, going up and down the ladder. Here, again, Yaakov meets Vayifga. He encounters malachei Elokim again, and the Midrash Haggadah says Vayifgu bo malachei Elokim. Pershu hamalachim shlachu michutz laaretz v'nilvu hamalachim lachniso laaretz. Right, that these are just like the chutz laaretz ones came to meet him to bring him out. Now he has the Eretz Yisrael ones. These are the two machanot that he actually sees. And again, the whole idea then is by Uvo Malachei Elokim. This time the Malachim are going to encounter him, right? Basically, he came to them with a Pgia. Now they're coming to him with a Pgia, which is a beautiful closure because what is it telling you about Yaakov's initial Pgia?
It was accepted.
And that it was accepted, Bidyu, meaning that his tefillah in the end was answered, which now you understand. What was his tefillah? His tefillah was, Hashem, I don't know if I'm ever going to come back here. And what did Hashem tell him in his, Hashem promised that he would, and then, and then they actually did. So a beautiful closure to Yaakov's tefillah, which maybe is another reason why that term Pigia in the end is, even though it's a harsh terminology, is also a very positive one because Yaakov, unlike Abraham, we saw where there isn't necessarily a positive response, and Yitzchak just sees. It's not clear. He sees Rivka, she's there, and then he has to do something. He has to bring her in. By Yaakov, it was harsh. It was a very difficult encounter with God. But in the end,
not even the mindset. Remember, you have to go back and do whatever you promised.
Exactly. And Hashem is basically encountering him in return. Right, and basically saying, okay, your harsh tefillah basically paid off. Hindi.
Sorry. But one other thing also, also when it says Vayifga, to me also, like when you also bring up the other sources that talk about, let's say when you don't see rain, when you need things, it also like a little bit for our own selves sounds like at times that we are lacking emunah. Like that the fact that he shows up to him in the sulam and that he shows him it's going up and down and that we're Hakadosh Baruch Hu, like that I'm here. And then when we daven, like all of a sudden we don't have rain, and when it's taken away from us, it's like us being able to recognize where does the rain come from, and that it doesn't just come stum, that it comes from anywhere. And when we're lacking maybe a little bit of that, like emunah, and also like even now, like here in Israel, like we get to recognize really the rain. Like when I lived in America, I could care less if it rained; it was like a nuisance. And here we really feel that, is it going to happen this year? Is it not going to happen this year? And then sometimes even we put a special tefillot because it's not coming, and we really get to see the bracha of it here. But some of it comes from, will it happen? Like, I don't know. Hashem, are you there? Are you going to give it to us?
Beautiful. So can I just add that word excellent, meaning you definitely feel by Yaakov, that's how we started this year, Alti Rabdi Yaakov. Yaakov feels more than anyone else exactly what Hindi is describing, namely anxiety. Right, so maybe pigia is really an expression of anxiety, of our own fears. And how do you come to God when you're anxious? How do you come to God? Again, more with a harsher term, right? I'm pleading upon you. It's almost like a pleading, right? A harsh pleading. And so that's even a better word, perhaps. Again, that I kept using the term encounter because it really is an encounter, but it's a harsh encounter. So it's entreating, but entreating is really, I would say, most synonymous with pleading. Yeah, fema'od, 100%. So by Yaakov, you feel it more, right? And that makes sense then that not only is it literally nighttime, but when it's night, you feel right and dark, then you feel that anxiety all the more. And that's the time for a p'gia.
Shani, the idea of p'gia, when you talked about in the beginning about the machsom by the kotel, it's like he wanted to go and God said, wait a minute, you're not going anywhere. You're going to stay here. And that's a p'gia. In other words, God forced him, because otherwise he would have, it's like Bilam, right? He couldn't, the Hamor looked and he couldn't go anywhere because, he saw the chasima, it's the same thing. All of a sudden, he's chasum, he can't go anywhere. So it's nighttime.
Right, that's why I like the pshat and the drash are really intertwined, right? Meaning who's encountering who? And the answer is
both. Kadosh Baruch Hu is making him encounter him.
Right. Beautiful. So on that note, let's keep on pleading to Kadosh Baruch Hu for more rain, Be'ezrat Hashem. And have a Shavua Tov Mevorach. Next week, Erev Chanukah, there is shiur. The question is the following week. Nachon, I think it's up to everyone. Okay, so we're going to let you know next week if there's shiur the week after. Be'ezrat Hashem. Mitzuyan. Okay, Shavua Tov U'Mevorach.
Shavua Tov. Thank you so much. Have a good week, everybody.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience this morning.